Hey guys, Danielle here over at Danielle's Swiss Bookkeeping. So we are doing our quick budget talk. We rescheduled it from last week just due to a little bit of craziness. Not to say that this week is not also crazy, but it's a different kind of crazy. So, I mean, the other reason why is I think that this is such an important topic for people, and because a lot of what we do is money and finance, to be able to come online and offer you guys some more resources and some more tips and tricks like that around budgeting and how to manage on a smaller amount of income, I think is incredibly important. So, yeah, we're going to be talking about, budgeting for a new crisis plan. So what do we do when we're dealing with a crisis? It's the things that we want to be working on. We'll go business owners first, and then we'll do personal after. So for business owners, when you're constructing a crisis plan, when it comes to budgeting and it comes to workflow inside your business, we're going to talk about just some things that you want to keep in mind. So when you're talking about it, you want to identify the scope of work involved. So are we talking about a crisis plan to operate or to close down or to mitigate? Are we looking for a long-term engagement? Are we looking for a short-term engagement? Are we looking for zero staff? Are we looking for a skeleton staff? So the first thing we want to do is do risk assessment and research. So when we're doing risk assessment, the first step is to audit existing plans. So what's missing and what has changed? This will also depend on how long ago you built a previous plan. If you have not ever created a previous plan, then you are going to be starting from scratch, which is important. You will want to interview key executives covering as many key functions and departments of your business as possible to get their way in. And basically that will give you a keen sense of the emerging and most pressing risks in each of those areas. If budgets and the timeline allow for it, a formal risk assessment is invaluable, although in practical terms, this is often just a bit too rich for the budget for many corporate communication departments. A review of best practices in your own industry or in the wider world of crisis response will also help build your guide, which means, in layman's terms, look at what other people are doing that do the same thing as you. So, by proxy, I have dealt with many other accounting firms in this city over the last 10 years, which means I happen to be on most of their mailing lists. So what's happening right now is a lot of offices are closing their offices to the public, but they are continuing to work, which means that they're offering digital alternatives and trying to protect their staff and mitigate crowds and things like that. As of today, we're still open. We are open for normal business, but we are encouraging digital practices, which means that if you have an existing appointment, yes, we are still open, but we are mitigating that we're trying to mitigate that on a daily basis, which means if you are more comfortable sending everything digital, you're self-isolating, we totally respect that, and we're still absolutely happy to offer the exact same services as we normally would. As the situation escalates over the next little while, as the business owner, it's up to me to make the decision whether or not we're going to close more completely to the public, but again, we are going to continue to work. So when I'm talking about a crisis response plan for my office, that's what I'm looking at. I'm looking at general, health inquiries that are coming down. I'm talking to my different departments in my own business, so my bookkeepers, my accountants, my personal tax preparers, and my administrative team, and saying, hey, as an organization, what do we need? What do our restrictions look like? And what is our ability to be able to work short-term, long-term? What are the risks involved? And then coming up with a plan. Now, as of right now, that plan will very likely change. But for today, it is what it is. And it's based on an educated decision in regards to what everybody else in the industry is doing as well. The second one is organization response and protocol. So the first section of the playbook is about how the overall organization responds to a crisis. Who is on the team and what roles do they play? How do you assess the level of risk from a specific issue? Overreaction and underreaction are both just as detrimental. What are the processes which support and guide the response? Do we have the tools and resources to manage an issue via social media and digital media? What are we tackling and analyzing? What are the highest priority issues? And do we understand what our risks are? I think right now every organization is sitting down saying, hey, we didn't actually really have a plan. And I'm not gonna lie, we didn't have a 100% plan ourselves. So a lot of this has been building it on the fly. For a lot of larger institutions, larger companies, there have been some rough outlines, which has helped, or in specific industries, there are absolute safety protocols that are already in place, which is awesome. For smaller organizations, it's either we're really great, or we're closing our doors, or we're trying to mitigate as much as we can. We're laying off our staff. Restaurant clients, hospitality industry in general is in a really rough spot right now. I know that a lot of them have moved to offering, delivery only or things like that. So it still continues to allow them to operate. But I think it's highlighting how much we really don't, or we haven't had a plan in place as organizations. So what I'm doing today is kind of going over some touch points that will not only hopefully help you today, but will also ensure that once everything comes back up and we continue to operate like normal, that we're building a better response plan in place in the future. So part of this is budgeting, and part of this is risk assessment and things like that. The next point we want to talk about is individual scenario responses. So the second section of the preparedness playbook includes individual response plans to the threat scenarios that are most likely to pose the biggest danger to the organization's business and reputation. The individual plans would include responses at varying levels of threat, drafting statements and talking points, and other resources that would be intended to effectively manage the situation, especially in the early stages. This is a great example of this is government. Like, I know politics aside, people, seriously, politics aside, it doesn't matter what party that you subscribe to right now, we're watching this scripted, start of a response from the government. We start with basic. Hey, we're going to be helping you. Yes, we don't know what that looks like yet, but we're working on it. Next level of communication comes out and says, we have talked through the first couple of steps. We have assessed things. Here's our beginning stages of plans and what we're planning to offer. Great. Next step is, hey, these are the plans. Here's a little bit more detail. Here's the implementation. Great. Next thing, hey, these are either working or they're not working. We need more, we need less. And then they build a new plan and they continue to roll out action plans as they go. Most likely that's kind of how most businesses are dealing with the situation. So as we roll things out, 2 weeks ago, my plan was different than it is today. Will it be different in 2 weeks from now? Potentially. I don't know what that looks like, but I do know that the me 2 weeks ago and the me today are treating the situation very differently. And so the response times and assigning people roles and responsibilities, putting information out publicly. Yesterday, I sat and drafted a ton of emails for my staff to send out to each of their client portfolios to basically say, hey, as of today, this is where we're sitting. This is what our options are. Here's our capabilities. Here's what we're not allowed to do. Here's what we're not going to do. Here's how we're modifying. And with that, it breaks up the tasks and responsibility for, my frontline administrators and then myself as the business owner. We are, it's just like any other business that has tried to stay open. We are dealing with an onslaught of questions and concerns and fears, and all of it is absolutely real. Are we able to handle it 100% perfectly? No. Are we trying our best? Yes. Is it going to change tomorrow? Probably. But as we have more updates, dividing responsibilities into team members inside our organization to make sure that we get the information to you as fast and as accurately as possible is my number one concern. So individual scenario responses. That also says that there are different responses for each department in our business. There are responses for my administrators. There are responses for my bookkeepers. There are responses for our personal tax team, and there are responses for our accountants, which means that I have to script different protocols and different speaking points and different touch points for each of those departments. And your business is very likely the same. So when we are creating an action plan for a crisis, we want to make sure that we're identifying that the needs of each individual department in our business may be different to each other. And then you might have like an organization-wide thing that you're doing. So for us, it's everybody's got an email bounce back message that says, hey, thank you very much for contacting us. Our responses are incredibly delayed. We're doing our best to try and mitigate as much as we can. Here's some important stuff because these are basically the frequently asked questions that we're getting. So if you can read through that, then hopefully that will mitigate the amount of responses that we have to pump out, because we're saying, hey, we already we have the pre-idea of what your questions and concerns are going to be. So we're trying to mitigate it on a quick basis. We're putting up videos, we're putting up information on Facebook, we're putting stuff up on the website, things that we can do for critical, quick responses for you guys as much as possible. The next one is access and activation. So it's one thing to have a plan written down and approved. It's another to have it readily accessible and actionable when a fast looming reputation event threatens, or when your budget, do you suddenly lose your ability to make money? Yeah, it's going to speed up the response time of how quickly you have to implement your crisis plan. Especially if the crisis begins out of office hours. Like, did it start on a weekend? Did we get rapidly changing information last Sunday? Every parent in our organization got the notification that schools are canceled. There's no childcare available. Does that mean that the way that our response times are being handed down has changed quickly? Absolutely. As a business owner on Sunday night, I had to find a way to make sure that my staff were communicated with so that come Monday morning, we knew that everybody still needed to be at work. Understanding with extenuating circumstances that there could be exceptions, but that's kind of the action plan that we needed to have. So sometimes those big important updates don't happen inside working hours, which means as business owners, you have to come up with a new crisis plan quickly, and you have to make sure it's actionable. Ours has not been 100% actionable, and it's okay for me to say that. Why? Am I admitting defeat? Of course not. Am I wishing that I had things done a little bit better? Absolutely. But I'm a small business owner reacting just like you guys. So coming out and asking for understanding and offering advice and tips and tricks, this is the stuff that I myself as a business owner I'm actually doing as well. So am I sitting on a soapbox preaching at you guys? No. Can I do that? No. But is it nice to hear from somebody else that's also a business owner saying, hey, here's the stuff I haven't done right, but here's the stuff I can advise you on, so that if you are starting to make these action plans, depending on how your company and your business has reacted to the current situation, you might be able to implement these and do a little bit better than I have. That's important. So basically you want to use technology if you can to implement quickly, which means, do you have Google Drives? Do you have software? Do you have communication devices for people? Do you have text messages available? Are you calling your staff members? Are you basically trying to put in place this action plan as fast as possible? Is it an action plan that can be delivered via email? Is it something that has to be phone delivered to each and every single one of your clients? Are there blanket things that you can put up and then more specific things that you feed different specific answers to after the fact? All of that stuff helps you create a faster implemented action plan during a crisis. The last thing is team preparedness and training. So you don't want the team's first experience of a crisis and the first test of their grasp of a crisis preparedness plan to be a real, fast-moving, and highly dangerous threat. Guess what, people? We're dealing with a global pandemic issue, which means that this is going to be most of yours, and including our first real-time crisis reaction plan implementation, and it's not coming to us delivered on a silver platter. It's coming in bursts and snippets, because we are waiting on bated breath, just like all the rest of you guys, to wait and see what the government and other institutions are going to be doing in order to offer us more real-time updates as well. So we want to make sure that in preparation for this to maybe happen again in the future, that we're building into our budget at least one workshop which will test the team with a realistic, though scripted scenario drawn out from your organization's crisis playbook. This is going to be one of those future thinking things. Obviously, we're not able to test because we're actually in the middle of a real life crisis at the moment. But in the future, basically you want your team to be faced with an issue which starts slowly, but then during the season begins to grow more serious and complex, and how your plan's going to react. So what are your first line defenses? What are your second line defenses? What are your third line defenses? Things like that. And at the higher end of the budget, realistic social media posts and broadcasts are created to make the situation even more real. The observations from these workshops will allow you to further strengthen the crisis plan and your team. So again, some of these are future tidbits that will hopefully help as we react in the future to either this evolving into something bigger or the next crisis, and how we can better prepare ourselves in the future. Basically we live in uncertain times. This is a brand new threat that nobody really saw coming, and a lot of people are not 100% prepared for. So hoping for the best, working with the information that you have, and building something so that you can support your organization, your team, and your clients as best as you can. The second thing we're going to talk about is creating a crisis budget. We all know the importance of having a household budget in place to help us maintain control of where our money is going. What if a sudden economical and financial crisis were to hit? Would you be able to meet your budget obligations on a reduced income? Unfortunately, you never know when a crisis will hit. layoffs, overtime reactions, or the deaths of a spouse, or a global pandemic can happen without much warning. So having a plan B in place before a crisis hits can help you. Again, this is going to be mitigation tips and tricks because we are currently in the middle of an economic crisis due to a pandemic that is hitting on a global scale. So basically what we're going to talk about is just help to identify what is critical and what is not critical. This is going to be catered a little bit more to the personal side, but I'm going to be sharing more resources over the next week on budget, crisis plans and things like that for business and for personal. So keep it tuned for those. But basically, what is a crisis budget? A crisis budget is different from a typical household budget because it helps you identify the items in your budget that are essential and those that are not. When an event happens in your life that drastically affects your finance, you'll need to make certain adjustments to your spending lifestyle in order to be able to fit your reduced budget and stay afloat until things are back to normal for you. Too often, people faced with a financial crisis fail to make appropriate adjustments to their lifestyle and end up being unable to meet their primary obligations, such as mortgage or rent payments, which should actually be your main top priority. For example, if you've lost your job and no immediate opportunities to supplement that income, do you really need cable television to survive? Right? There are government programs that are falling into place here, but based on information as of this morning, if you show up at a Service Canada office trying to get EI and other supplementary programs, there are mass gatherings of people waiting for their chance to be able to speak their piece and have their situation heard and apply for those benefits. There is a flood of people in our system right now that would normally not be there. So yes, Service Canada is mitigating a ton of issues. They are coming out with unrolling these programs that are coming down from the government, but there are 700 million people trying to get access to those same resources, which means as much as you can do at home on the front lines to mitigate your own budget, first, yes, there will be help. Yes, there will be ways to mitigate the risks, but there's going to be a bit of a delay just due to the full volume of people that are all trying to access the same resources at once. So it's important to understand that these changes that need to be made are probably not permanent. Understanding that will make it easier to cut expenses out of your life if you know that you will be able to bring them back into your lifestyle once your finances are in a better condition. Do we really need to pay for a gym membership right now? No. Can you get out of your gym membership? Maybe. But you can turn your home into a home workout space. Do you really need to be paying for cable television? Probably not. Are you going to survive on the internet? Pay for your internet and cut your cable back. I personally haven't had cable in 8 years. Why? Because it's not an expense that I consider essential or important, and everything that I want to be able to watch, I can still do so by just paying for internet. That might be something that you might want to look at. So how can I cut more out of my budget than I already have? This is a very important question. So for some, creating and committing to a budget at all is a difficult enough task to accomplish. So it's understandable that the thought of an even more strict crisis budget might seem impossible. Again, you have to remember that these extra budget cuts are temporary. Think about the things you spend money on right now that you can live without for a few months or however long you foresee your financial state to remain in trouble, and cut them out of your budget. Things that are needs can stay, while things that are wants should be removed until you're financially ready to pay for them again. We can sometimes be clouded by what we think we need simply because we're used to having it. If you're unsure if you need something or not, cut it out anyway. If you're able to function day to day without it, chances are it isn't needed or essential. Here are some examples of some basic needs and wants to help you decide. So needs are going to be rent, mortgage payments, utility bills, groceries, gas for your car, insurance, and then wants are things like cable TV, dinner out, movie tickets, hair, cosmetic, expensive cell phone data plans. There are obviously way more things out there, and I'm going to talk through a few other ones, but again, I'll share some more resources for you guys over the coming weeks. But think about the things that you can live without. It's huge. Now, in the current climate of things, there are a lot of places that are actually even just straight up closed, which helps you narrow down what's essential and what's not. Can you go see your hairstylist right now? Probably not. Can you order out and go out for dinner as much? Probably not. Are there still lots of places doing skip the dishes? Of course. Is it more fiscally responsible to be buying groceries and cooking your own meals? Of course. As a family of 4 at home, we can spend $100 and order one meal from Boston Pizza. If we go to the grocery store, I can feed my entire family on a pack of chicken breasts and a thing of rice and some vegetables or salad for under 30 bucks. That's huge. That's a $70 difference, which means I have the ability to do that 3 times over for my family in relation to what one meal eating out would cost. That is something that, practically speaking, we need to tune up and chill out on, because it is convenient to order food. And yes, you might be completely self-isolated. If you are sick, absolutely. This is not a be-all to end-all chat. Again, not standing on a soapbox preaching at you. But if you have the capability, there are grocery delivery services as well. That will be, again, still more cost effective to you than ordering skip the dishes and skip the dishes and skip the dishes and skip the dishes. There are alternatives, and if you go online to the magical world of Google, you can look up a lot of those resources, and you're going to find fairly inexpensive alternatives that are going to allow you to keep your crisis budget in place for longer. So how do I create a crisis budget? First of all, it's a good idea to create a crisis budget for each possible scenario, because each scenario will result in different sets of circumstances and therefore different outcomes. Hopefully you've already created your monthly household budget, and in doing so have gone through the exercise on journaling your expenses. If not, then you are going to want to look for how to create a basic budget. If you need a basic budget template, I am going to be sharing one to our Facebook and to our Facebook group, which is just a downloadable Excel file that is already pre-formalized and everything. So you can punch in your information and you can create yourself a fairly decent, easy, basic budget system. But for this exercise, we'll assume that you've gone through the journaling exercises and created your normal household budget. So you've identified in the last 3 months, on average, what do you spend on this, 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 and this. So we'll further assume that in creating your household budget that you've also cut back on extenuating expenses, and that your expenses do not exceed your income. That's a good place to start. If you have not done the budgeting yourself thing yet, then all of this lovely free time that you are faced with, what I suggest as a financial advisor and as an accountant and a bookkeeper and a tax preparer, don't look at 1 month, look at 3 months. Do your average of 3 months. If your employment is up and down and not very secure, and you have changing circumstances on a daily basis, do 6 months. So what does that mean? It means going through your bank statements and your credit card statements and starting an Excel spreadsheet and saying, under this column header, this is everything for meals, this is everything for home expenses, this is everything for recreation, this is everything for groceries, this is everything for online subscriptions, this is things like that. And you just start to slot them in, and then you grand total everything out. You average it over 3 months, and you say, okay, here's what I've brought in over the last 3 months, here's what I know I'm going to be bringing in at a reduced rate, and here's all the things that I know that I need to spend money on, and here's the things that I want to spend money on. It sucks to cut things back, okay? Every single person can say that, but it is incredibly necessary. Right now we are dealing with a huge amount of panic because people are going with knee-jerk reactions and saying, hey, I need to deal with this right now. But what can you do to step back? This normal exercise of creating a 3 to 6 month budget and actually saying, here's what I spend my money on, here's what I can cut out, here's what my actual bills look like, should not take you longer than a couple of hours. Which means if your first response is to panic, step back, breathe, do a yoga video, and then sit down and say, I'm going to make a point to identify, first and foremost, honestly and critically, what I spend my money on and what I can reasonably trim down to. Then you're looking for government assistance and programs that say, hey, if I know that I can build a budget for the next 2 weeks, then I'm not screaming and yelling and crying desperately for economic measures to get me through. I know that within about 2 weeks, I should be able to access these government programs. Great. I know my budget can only get me through a week. Okay, now you've identified that you have a timeline. It could be 3 days. I hope it's not 2 to 3 days. I hope it's at least a week. But everybody's situation is different. So if you are in a very real emergency system, obviously, modify this as it makes sense to you. But for most people, we can manage to get by on a week or 2 weeks if we're extra diligent and we cut out anything that's not relevant. So once your regular monthly budgets are in place, you can start putting together your crisis budget. In order to create your crisis budget, you'll need to start by categorizing your budget items as wants and needs. Remember, this is a budget that will only be used in an extreme financial crisis, and your goal through this crisis is to survive without losing the things most important to you. Once you've determined what your needs are, you'll now have to try to determine what your income will be, and if this crisis budget is for a scenario for loss of income, is it realistic? If you're laid off or if you're waiting for unemployment, how much do these benefits pay you? How much does that stretch over? And what does that actually pay for? A good place to start with regards to income is to redo your budget as if you had half of your income, the lowest imaginable possible income. That is a really great place to start for a crisis budget. Imagine that worst case scenario, your spouse loses their job and one of you has a massive injury, there's a ton of extra things. Could you survive on half of what you think you could survive on? If you can, believe me or don't believe me, once you start to identify what those worst case scenarios look like, you will be amazed at how much you can survive on if you really have to make it work. Bulk goods, cereal, rice and whatever meat you can get your hands on, porridge, those are all cheaper alternatives to food that can just get you by. You know, it's frozen food, it's stuff like that. Knockoff brands, alternatives, you know, there's ways to make your budget cheaper if you're looking for them. If you find yourself spending an exorbitant amount of money on something that isn't essential to your daily life and would bring your expenses down significantly, then you have to remember to just rip the Band-Aid off and remove it from your crisis budget. Spending $200 on a data plan for your smartphone, if you're stuck inside, you know, you're probably already paying for internet. Is there a way that you can put most of your actionable time on your internet bill rather than an excessive data plan bill on your phone? Switch your plan to a cheaper phone and remember to use less data during the day. Are you on Wi-Fi? Are you actually using your data? Do you need 22 gigabytes of data on your phone? Maybe not. Is your grocery bill holding you back from getting out of the red? A study conducted by Consumer Reports found that by filling your grocery cart with generic brand items, you could save yourself up to 30% of every grocery bill. Afraid of what generic brands contain? Generic items are typically are identical once you ignore the famous label. In fact, some companies have even created their own generic items to save money without risking the taste and quality of their product. That's huge. You know, there are so many alternatives. I'm going to go through a scenario of, say, a regular spending budget versus a crisis budget to give you guys some ideas, and then I'm going to post this as well so you guys can actually physically see it. But we're talking about, say, a regular spending budget. Your income coming in is $4,000. Okay, so our crisis budget should start with half of that. So our crisis budget starts at $200. Our rent or mortgage payments, say we're running with about $800. Yes, of course, everybody's numbers will fluctuate. Just for example, this is what I'm going with, okay? So we've got rent and mortgage at $800. On the regular spending budget and onto the crisis budget, that number stays the same. Why? Because you still have to pay your mortgage and you still have to pay your rent. Utilities at $200, utilities under $200. Again, same thing, same item on both sides. Cable TV and internet. On the top, regular spending might be $60 a month. You might want to cut out the cable TV. That's important, right? You don't necessarily need it right now. Cell phone plan, $200. Could we make a way for that to come down to, say, $100 or $65? There are really great alternative cheap cell phone packages that will still allow you to stay connected but won't rob your bank account. Insurances are probably going to stay the same. So $250, $250. Car payment. Car payment, again, is probably going to stay the same. So car payment, same numbers. Groceries, normally at $150. Could we save 30% of that by going down and reducing using generic brands like we talked about? So can we save 20 to 30 to 40% by buying only the essentials, switching from premium brands to generic brands, and ordering or purchasing more bulk items that have longer shelf values than the instant gratification items we're so used to spending money on? Entertainment would normally be $50. Do you really need an entertainment budget right now? No. Why? Because learn what cheap resources are, because your luxury entertainment budget should not exist right now. Yes, we all need to do things, but going for a walk, playing board games, doing crap like that, reading an old-fashioned book, those are great entertainment sources that are still going to exist even if your regular means of entertainment don't exist. There's everything imaginable being streamed to the internet right now so that you can still access things from the safety of your own home. That's really great. That's cutting out your entertainment budget. Hobbies. Our hobby budget's going to take a hit right now? Yeah. You're going to be able to pay for all your video game subscriptions? Maybe not. That's okay. Are you going to be able to keep subscribing to all those magazines? Maybe not. Hobbies, like, again, just pick your core essentials. That is where we're looking at. I mean, it's so important. So income, half of what we expect it to be, go. Build that crisis budget. Be critical. Be honest. The worst thing you can do in a budget scenario is bicker with your spouse and point fingers and say crappy names to the other person. The worst thing you can do is lie to yourself about what you actually spend money on. If you actually spend $600 on alcohol every month, guess what? That needs to change. If it does not, then you are sacrificing $600 towards something else that is an actual need. You need to be smart, you need to be critical, and you need to be brutal with yourself in order to create an effective crisis budget. It's important. And the last piece that I want to talk about is how do you prepare your kids for a financial crisis? This is one of those most important scenarios that I think gets overlooked. And as a family, we've tried really hard to make sure that our kids understand what's going on. Because your kids will not remember the specifics of this actual crisis if they are under a certain age, but they will understand and they will remember and they will feel your reaction to the situation. If you are one of those people that mass went out and bought 700 packs of toilet paper, well, you're gonna have toilet paper till the end of time. Good for you. But in the end of the day, did your kids see a massive greed-orientated reaction to a stressful situation? Yes. Are they gonna remember that? Yes. Is that going to be their default to run under when things become a crisis in their life? Yes. Now, if you say, hey guys, we're going to be eating a little bit simpler meals, we're going to be cutting back on cable television, we're going to be going back to the old fashions like, board games and coloring and, we're going to watch a couple things on the internet, we're going to basically hunker down and just work on essentials only and we're going to be just fine. They're going to remember that you had a calm and collected conversation with them, and chances are that is going to be how they identify reacting to a crisis in the future. So explain to your kids in terms they can understand what the problem is and how you plan to fix it. If you attempt to hide what's really going on, they will only assume the worst. They don't have the same cognitive reasoning skills as we have as adults, which means we need to dumb it down, simplify it, and make it easy to digest because that's so important. Hey Shane, thanks. I'm glad to hear that there's some value here. This is stuff that, like I said, on the fly, we're going to keep developing and we're going to keep creating and we're going to keep rolling out because there's going to be more changes. This is not an absolute, only do this and disregard everything else. This is me as a business owner and a parent and an individual saying, hey, this is what we're learning on the fly. Here's what I can offer to you guys. And hopefully there's something in there. It's not going to be everything, but hopefully there's 1 or 2 points that you guys can use that are going to affect you in your daily life. That's important. But the big thing I can say is if you have kids and stuff, gut reactions, chances are if you haven't explained what's going on, your kids already know something is wrong. And kids will blow things out of proportion because that's what they do. Like I said, those cognitive reasoning skills are not quite there, which means you as a parent, your frontline responsibility is to take care of your kids. And shutting them off and closing the doors and acting like nothing's wrong is not serving anyone. They don't know the specifics of what's wrong, but they already sense a difference and they know it's not a good one. By explaining it to them, even in the simplest of terms, you can put their young minds at ease and prevent them from worrying needlessly. This is just some tips and tricks today, like I said, to offer hopefully a little bit of advice, a little bit of relief, and help you build together a plan that is more specifically catered to your family. What I do with my family is going to be different than what you do with your family. What I do with my business is going to be different than what you do for your business. But we're all facing the same crisis right now. And as a community, I hope that there's some solidarity there that says, hey, you know, all these people are going, you know, and putting out as many resources that they can. They're offering modified services. They're trying their best to answer phone calls and you know, and squash fears and concerns. And that we hopefully, you know, develop here into a more global sense of understanding and reasonability when dealing with other people. Because say for an, you know, for an organization like ours, I'm constantly pleading with people to understand that our response times are delayed. There's not a lot other than trying our best that we can do right now. Your questions and concerns are very valid and we want to help you. We also just need a little bit more understanding and a little bit more patience, because we are not looking to screw you over. We are not looking to treat you like you're unimportant. We are not treating you, hopefully not badly. We're just trying our best. And sometimes our stress levels are very high as well, which means we are human. And on behalf of all of my staff members, if you get a slightly more curt response, it is not directed at you personally. It is not my staff telling you to F off. It is us saying, hey, we're trying to mitigate the essentials. And that's really, really important. You know, you need to be able to understand that while a lot of people are not working, some people are. Nurses, medical practitioners, bankers are all still working. Like, I sat on the phone for an hour with RBC today to find out if there was anything they could do for my business. The immediate response was not really. And you know what? I could have screamed and yelled and bitched at the poor guy on the other end of the phone, but I didn't do that. Why? Because I went in not expecting a lot. And that's just reasonability coming from being a business owner, understanding that people are not going to, like, there's just not going to be a lot of answers today. May there be more answers in a week? Absolutely. Could there be more answers in a month? Absolutely. Are there other channels besides just my bank? Yes. Am I exhausting those resources? Yes. Am I expecting, again, just free fistfuls of money? No. Am I very grateful when there is an avenue that I can explore? Today they offered to defer 6 months of my minimum payment on my business credit card. It's not a line of credit, it's not a loan, but you know what? For me today, that's $600 that I don't have to deal with in the next 6 months. I'm okay with that. That helps. It's a little bit here and there that's going to make the overall situation better. So when you're dealing with other people right now, what I'm hoping is that you are taking into effect the amount of stress that people are dealing with when they are still working. We are trying our best to field all of your questions and concerns, and I'm very aware that a large populations of our clientele will not be looking at our Facebook videos or listening to me earnestly pleading with people. But what I am asking for is that if you do know anybody, that you do take the time to basically say, hey, you might want to consider that these people are dealing with a lot too. So I'm going to end the video there because my phone's going to die. So thank you guys very much for listening to my rant. I'll reshare it in the groups. I'll share some more resources. I hope you guys are dealing safely, stay sane, and stay safe with your family and loved ones. And we'll talk to you guys soon.